This is Antic, the Atari 8-Bit podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz.
20 minutes past the hour. Next, you'll meet one of the country's young, up-and-coming columnists and learn why.
11-year-old Rawson Stovall of Abilene, Texas, doesn't waste his time playing with video games. Instead, he writes a newspaper column about them. It's called the Vid Kid. It's almost a year old, and now it's in 15 newspapers around the country. And how about that? You must be very excited about that.
Yes.
Are you a tough reviewer, or do you go kind of easy on these games, Rawson?
Well, I only review the home games right now, and I review only games that are good. I don't go on the bad ones. In other words, I'm telling the consumer or my reader about the good games and not the bad.
She is just 13 years old, and what he does, believe it or not, do you know anything about computers?
No.
I don't know, kids seem to take to computers, but he's got a syndicated weekly column. It's run in as many as 20 newspapers over the past 3 years, and viewers in about 210 cities get to see him regularly on a show called The New High-Tech Times, and he writes computer game reviews, which the industry pays a lot of attention to. Would you welcome, please, from Abilene, Texas, Rawson Stovall. Rawson? You know, you look like a business executive, too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's nice. You got a nice three-piece suit there, and you look good. What do your friends call you?
Just Rawson.
Just Rawson, huh?
Mm-hmm.
No nickname or anything?
No nickname.
I was asking Mr. McMahon if he knew anything about computers. Do you find that young people take to computers easier than adults, sometimes get scared of them?
Yeah, I think that's true because kids like to experiment more with computers, and they're not afraid to try out different things with the computers. And doing so, they can know the computer better.
You know, I think you're absolutely right. I think most adults are scared that they're not going to understand it and look silly, and they don't want to fail, so they just don't get involved in it.
Right.
And you're probably right. Now, do manufacturers pay a lot of attention to your columns now?
Yes, presidents of some of the companies. I've met a lot of the presidents of the different companies, and they pay attention to what I write. And there was a designer for one company who said that after reading one of my reviews, decided that I liked the cute, whimsical games, and he went out and designed another one.
He did, so you having some effect on the games.
Right.
Isn't that nice to see that you can have some effect by writing a column like this?
As you no doubt gleaned from the clips of his appearances on CBS Morning News and The Tonight Show, Rawson Stovall was only a child when he started writing a syndicated newspaper column in which he reviewed computer games and home video games. The column, called Vid Kid, appeared in up to 20 newspapers around the United States. He was, in fact, the first nationally syndicated reviewer of video games in the country. He is author of the Vid Kid's Book of Home Video Games, a compilation of his reviews, which was published in 1984, when Rawson was 12 years old. This interview took place on January 23rd, 2018.
You know, I really got into video games in 1982. I was a 10-year-old, and I wanted a Atari 2600 badly, and had asked Santa Claus to get me one, and my next-door neighbors got one, but I didn't get one. I had asked my dad and my mom, and my dad said video games are a waste of time and money. And so with knowing that I couldn't rely on Santa Claus or my parents,
right.
We had 3 pecan trees in our backyard in Texas, and I picked up the pecans and shelled them and halved them and packaged them and went door to door and sold bags of pecans and made $200, enough to buy an Atari 2600
Wow.
On my own. And that was great. But, you know, the games themselves cost $30, $40 in 1982 money. And once I got past the first 2 games that I had, it was very difficult getting other games. There was a local video rental store that was renting out some games, and so I was able to try some games and play them. And I just sort of got into the mode of really evaluating them and kind of reviewing them for my neighborhood friends.
Mm-hmm.
And it sort of dawned on me that that just about every weekend in the newspaper there would be movie reviews, and a movie at the time cost like $4 to go see, and there were reviews for TV shows which were free, but there was no reviews for video games, and video games cost $30 to $40. And usually back in those days, there often wasn't even a picture of the game on the box. So it really, really was a risky purchase for people.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt like there needed to be video game reviews. I needed them. And so that summer of 1982, I reviewed some games as a column, sort of 2 to 3 typewritten pages per game, and wrote several sample reviews and took them to my local newspaper, the Abilene Reporter News in Abilene, Texas, and said that they needed to, run a review of video games column, and that those were some examples. And they took my column. They first put me through a writing test where they took me out to see the opening of the movie Tron. Mm-hmm. Then took me back to the newsroom and watched me write a review of the movie that ran in the paper the next day.
Wow.
And I was to pass. So they were worried that, my mom and dad were really writing it for me.
Mm-hmm.
And, with the video game column, I sort of, I think some people might say it was difficult that it might have been difficult because I was a kid, but I use that really as my primary selling point to say who better to review video games than a kid.
Sure.
And so they picked up my column on a 6-month trial basis, and I wrote that column for 10 years weekly, and got it syndicated. So it first started out in the Abilene Reporter News. Then I self-syndicated it in about 10 to 15 newspapers. And then the column got picked up by Universal Press Syndicate, who I knew from doing syndicating the Far Side and Calvin and Hobbes, mm-hmm. and Dear Abby, and they picked up my column and syndicated it nationally. And so then it was in papers in cities that I hadn't visited.
That's amazing. So, I've seen videos of you that on various TV shows, and we'll get to that. And you seem like a little kid who was just like a hustler. You were just like, you were gonna get it done. But I mean, it seems like you would have to have just huge help, just like PR help and marketing help, and just from the parents. So I'd like to talk about that a little bit. I mean, it seems so they switched from video games are a waste of time to like having your back. Tell me about that.
Right. So I think that I would say that I was 10, and so of course it's very difficult for any kid to do things, even if I did a lot of it on my own without support of parents. My dad was very big on doing stuff. So video games are a waste of time. The way I could play games is by making them not a waste of time. And my mom was a high school English teacher, and my dad had been a journalism teacher in high school. So they both knew a little bit of the newspaper trade. And that might have been, too mysterious for me as a kid if I didn't have that knowledge. So that was certainly a thing. I was able to syndicate my column in other newspapers by myself because my dad was a regional director of the Texas Health Department for a large area of Texas and traveled a lot. And in the summer, I would just go with him. And so we would visit cities like Odessa, Midland, and San Angelo, and Waco, and Austin, and San Antonio. And I was able to get it in newspapers by just, in a way, cold calling upon newspapers, going in with a suit and tie and a briefcase and examples of my column. And by then, samples of my column, as printed in the Abilene Reporter News. And it was just a little, at that point, once you're in one thing, it's easier to do other things.
Sure.
I was always, kind of a hustler and would always, but that would be very, really supported by my parents. A year earlier had a year earlier I won a Texas Governor's Award for Outstanding Volunteer Service by collecting about $3,000 for the local Abilene Mental Health Association. So they had like a book readathon type of program, and the award was going to Six Flags, which was in Dallas, about 3 hours away. And my parents had said, I don't think we can go this year. And I was determined to make that happen. So I entered this contest. And instead of just reading a lot of books and going door to door, I visited local banks and oil companies and would go to, say, an oil services company, and they might donate $100 or $200. And then I would go to that company's, all of that company's competitors and say, this oil company gave me a check for $200, and I'm showing that they're, such a great company. I'm showing it to everyone. And so then that company would give me an even bigger check. And so
did you really do that because the oil was where the money was, and you knew that these guys were going to have cash?
Yeah, because I would go around my neighborhood and I'd get like 10 cents a book donation, and I was like, I'm never going to do this. So, and also a lot of those houses were already hit by other kids in the contest. So I literally just went to other. I was like, I have to go where the money is. That was a little bit part of overall my constitution as a kid.
And you're wearing this suit. I mean, like a 3-piece suit, and you just look adorable. And take yourself in the videos I've seen, took yourself so seriously, and not in a bad way at all. You must have just charmed the editors and charmed these oil guys, and there's no question there other than you were awesome.
I guess I did. I don't know. To me, at least for the column, it was such a no-brainer that it was such a necessity that for newspapers that ran reviews of for albums and for TV shows and for movies, for them to be ignoring video games while video games were on the cover of Time magazine was a huge, shortfall on their part. And here I was, with a column in hand, and it's already proven. And it was, once you do it, start doing it. It was pretty I mean, it wasn't without challenges, but it was pretty easy to keep doing it and getting it to grow.
Sure.
And from that point on, I did, magazine articles, and video game magazines started to come out about then. It was easier to do. I had a book of my reviews was published by Doubleday in 1984, and that is effectively a compilation of all of my columns.
Mm-hmm.
So sort of doing, getting over the first hurdle is the biggest deal.
So what were the challenges? You said it was not without its challenges. Can you give me some examples?
I wasn't in California, so I was completely away from the industry. I got $5 a column from a newspaper, so I wasn't making a ton of money. It's good when you're syndicated, and over time that my per column rate increased, but still I wasn't making god awful amounts of money, and I still have to go to Consumer Electronics Show every year, and
have to go. You poor thing.
Yeah, so, I mean, there are expenses. I also was, I had really, really severe asthma as a kid, and was in the hospital 30 plus times as a kid with asthma. And so balancing doing my column, balancing school, and balancing, just the time spent being sick was always a big challenge.
Sure. So let's talk about the travel a little bit. I read one column you did after going to the Winter 1983 Consumer Electronics Show, and in it you said you needed special dispensation because they didn't let minors in, so you had...
That's true. I can't remember the guy's name, but there was a head. In talking with video game companies, so I was really good at calling. I was good at cold calling people by just showing up at newspapers or showing up at oil companies for donations. So I was really good at just cold calling people. And in fact, years earlier, I called, I learned I could just call people at home. Like I called Mercer Mayer, the children's author at home, because I liked his books and I wanted to talk to him. So I found out his phone number and called him. And so I would just talk to video game companies and designers and their PR people, and everyone was telling me that I really needed to go to CES. And, certainly for the video game industry before E3, CES was the place to be. So I just made arrangements to go, and it was in Chicago. I believe maybe it was the Las Vegas one. I'm sorry, I can't remember. At any rate, I went, and lo and behold, they wouldn't let me in because it was a 18 years or over event. Mm-hmm. And I had to, appeal my case, and I certainly had columns or copies of my columns with me, and managed to get the approval of the head of CES, who just retired like a year or two ago, who gave me this special, signed letter that let me get in. Because even if I got a badge, any guard that would see me would stop me. So I had to have this special letter of approval, and I still would run into have hassles walking around CES.
Wow. And you also did, I guess, a keynote speech at Bits and Bytes, which was a computer show for young people, which I am trying to research separately. Tell me about that.
So I started doing, so in addition to writing my column and magazine articles, and having some interviews and on radio shows, TV shows, newspapers, that sort of thing, I also started doing some public speeches at different events. And one that I went to, I want to say there were a couple of them, was Bits and Bytes. And it was sort of was trying to be a convention about a lot about educational software, children's interactive media, focus, teachers, that sort of thing. And I had a speech that I would give at events. Usually I talked about the benefits of video games, and it's hard to, I think, understand now. But at the time in the 80s, video games were, very popular, but they were also reviled. And some cities banned arcades or banned kids from going to arcades. And at times there were talk, that you would hear in the public discourse, should video games be not available for kids under a certain age to play?
Mm-hmm.
And video games are bad. And a message that I liked to bring was that video games were not inherently bad, that they were good, that like movies and music, they had the power to help bring people together, that they were very good family events. I would always say, gosh, and something like thumbs that play together stay together, something like that. I'll have to see if I can remember where that came from. But I would say, to audiences of teachers and parents, not to use just video games as a babysitting tool, but to be involved with video games yourself, along with your kids, and that the social dynamics of video game play were really good.
What games from back then stuck with you as either particularly good or bad or just memorable?
From the Atari 2600 days, I always really liked Activision's Kaboom. I liked some of the Activision games by I want to say Dan Kitchen and Gary Kitchen. There was some kind of whimsical quality to some of those games, like Keystone
Capers. Yeah.
Capers. And I liked those games. I also really liked Demon Attack. I got to visit Imagic when I was a kid, and I stayed at the house of Bill Grubb, who was the president, who flew me out just to visit Imagic, and I stayed with his family for a couple of days.
Wow.
I liked a lot of those. I liked a lot of the Imagic games. Early on, when I first started, I started reviewing arcade games, but I quickly just gave up reviewing arcade games because I was limited to only the ones that would show up in Abilene, Texas, and I realized that wasn't a representative national slice of what was going on. So I moved to just doing home games. But I have a soft spot in my heart for the original arcade Pac-Man. And I think it really, for me, opened up, that video games weren't just shooting aliens, and that there were all kinds of cool possibilities. When one activity that I did in 1985, I believe, I emceed the New York announcement event of the Nintendo Entertainment System.
Yes.
And so, there was, to me, this somewhat obscure Japanese company. Of course, I knew about Donkey Kong, who was coming out with a game system. And by that point, I wasn't reviewing Atari 2600 games because the market had crashed, and I'd moved on to writing about probably VIC-20 and Commodore 64 games. And there was this company that was claiming that they were going to have a great video game system. And so I went out to New York to and sort of MC that unveiling. It was kind of a local event. It was a lot to New York press because it was going to be a limited New York test market for several months before they decided to roll it out nationally. And that was at that event was where I first saw Super Mario Brothers, and that is a legendary, groundbreaking game, and I saw it sort of for the first time as other people saw it for the first time, and saw it, with all of the makers of the game, Morimoto, showing it to me. And I really liked what Nintendo did to the game industry because they sort of brought it back into home and made it, they've always sort of thought of themselves more as a toy company, I think, than an electronics company. And sort of their philosophy of games and fun and family matched with what I had always sort of been preaching as well.
That sounds like an awesome time.
I liked also, but I also want to say I liked River Raid. So I did hear your guys' interview with
Carol Shaw.
Yeah. Love hearing about that.
Well, you didn't love Jumpman Jr. Jumpman is one of my very favorite games of all time, so I don't know.
Oh, yeah. Did you? There's one thing that I wound up over time doing with my column was mostly reviewing games that I liked, just because there were so many and I had a weekly column that I was choosing usually to review a game. So I wanted to make it be a, kind of a positive recommendation. So most things I reviewed were games that I liked. There were a few, examples that were not the case that stuck out in my mind, and they were games that I felt would be popular, and that I sort of had a duty to talk about. And some were like Rambo for the Nintendo Entertainment System. That game. Pac-Man for the Atari 2600. I know it was a technical marvel, but it disappointed me. E.T. Disappointed. There were a handful of games that I didn't have, super positive reviews for.
What did your friends think of all this?
Yeah, I don't know. I tried as best as I could to just be a neighborhood kid and have a normal kid life and sort of have this be a compartmentalized side thing that I did. But, at the same time, I was the kid on the block that had literally every game, and um, and I didn't necessarily want to play games all the time, and sometimes shows or things like that would come into town and film me. Like there was an ABC show called That's Incredible that came in, and they wanted to film me at a Chuck E. Cheese with, 5 of my friends. So some of my friends got to be, on shows through things like that. So there were points where that world sort of bled into my, my childhood friends' life, but I largely tried to keep those separate as best as I could.
Sure. So, all right, we got to talk about the TV stuff. I saw the Johnny Carson video clip and the Sunday morning CBS Sunday morning clip, and also, like you said, you're on That's Incredible and Hour Magazine and who knows what else. How did these things come about? That's incredible.
The one event that really happened was that kicked off a lot of it was I was at a CES in Chicago, so 83 summer Chicago probably, and a New York Times writer saw me walking around suit and tie and briefcase, and I'm like the only under 18-year-old person there, and I'm 11 years old, but I look probably 8. And this reporter wound up following me around for the next day or so and wrote, was going to write an article about me, and that was cool. We thought that would be like a little tiny side article somewhere in the paper, but it wound up being a big deal and had prominent placement, and that we didn't realize that at the time, but getting an article written about you in the New York Times changes everything. And an example, we we went to see on our last day was the morning that the article came out. We didn't know that it had come out, and it's pre-smartphones and no way to know things remotely. We went to CES, my mom and I, and that morning, and we were coming back around noon to check out of the hotel and go to the airport. And we got back to the hotel, and the message light was blinking, and my mom said, "See what those messages are," thinking it might be my dad asking about, or making sure we're leaving. And the hotel management said, we're going to run someone up because there's so many messages. And someone came up with something like 15 messages, and they were all from, Good Morning America, the Today Show, every, TV show and newspaper, and they were all wanting to get a hold of me. And they had all tracked me down at that hotel. It's surprising. And so we called my syndicate, Universal Press Syndicate at the time, and asked them, what do we do? And they said, go with the one that called you first, which may have been Good Morning America, and, call them back. And so we called them back, and we said, we're leaving on an airplane right now back to Texas. And they said, no, we will, we're going to pay for you first class leave to New York right now, and all expense paid. And I was on Good Morning America the next morning. And so, after that point, doing, again, sort of getting one article in the New York Times was a big lucky break. And after that, it was fairly easy for me to I mean, I had a lot. All the TV shows would call me at different points. The Tonight Show, they called me. I remember one morning in the summer. It may have been that summer. At home, and I think like 8 in the morning, which is weird because that would have been, like 6 in the morning, California time.
Mm-hmm.
But I was so asleep, and my mom came in super excited and said, "The Tonight Show wants to talk to you," and I was just so groggy, and I should have called them back, but I talked to them and answered questions. And then they said, we'll call you back. But then they didn't call us back. And we thought, I blew it. I was boring. I don't know. And they called me back maybe a year later and said, we want you to come on the show this date in July. Can you do it? And, I was a kid at the time. I never really saw the Tonight Show. It wasn't as big of a deal to me as the morning shows were, but it clearly was a cultural event and a cultural show, and I quickly learned because as my mom or dad would talk to people and mention it, the adults would were really, really excited about it, and a regret I have is they said, you're the first, whatever the date was, July 17th or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
They said, okay, well, you're the first booked guest. Is there anyone you want us to book for that night?
Wow.
And I am I was just couldn't come up with an answer. That's sort of the one thing in my whole life. I'm like, I wish I think of all these names now that I wanted to have met that I never did.
Wow. Who would you have
I say that,
for?
Yeah, though I will say that Dabney Coleman,
Mm-hmm.
Was an actor, and he was one of the guests that night, and he was just super, super friendly and nice. And years later, when I lived in California in the 90s, I ran into him again. So I think of all the people I would have liked to have met, but it was cool to have and great to have met him.
So before we started, you said it was a snow day and your kids at home watching some Netflix, and I'm wondering about your kids' relationship to video games and how you feel about it, and if he's into it, and tell me that.
Yeah, I think that video games are have dramatically changed from when I was a kid. They used to be effectively like a short story, and now they are like long TV series. And so, a lot of the games that he will play are free to play iPad games. And I'm a video game designer now, so I know about, how easy it is to get sucked into a game. And so I'm, for a kid, I'm wary of that for him. But he's really, really good at navigating UI and understanding the intricacies of games and design. And on some days, maybe school wasn't in, he's come into my work, and I've, gave him a whiteboard and a whiteboard marker and was like, design some games. So he'd be like 5 years old, and he really surprised me with his level of, his level of detail and his concepts of games. It really surprised me.
Wow.
And he would say, this is your gold icon. This is where you go to buy more gold. We really like the Wii. I still have a Wii, and those games are great. For a 5 to 6 year old.
Mm-hmm. Have you broken out the 2600 and show them how games used to be?
I have a 2600 flashback device, but and he loves Space Invaders. But a lot of my favorite games aren't on that system, and it stretches and there's some visual weirdness to it on a big screen TV that I haven't been able to solve. So the games look a little weird.
Yeah. So you said you're a video game producer, designer. Tell me about that job, and I don't.
Yeah.
Wikipedia says you're a video game producer. I really don't know what that job is. So
yeah. So I'm currently I'm specifically a designer, but I have many years as a producer. I sometimes say it's a little bit like in Hollywood. A producer may bring the script and hire a director, and they speak the budget and legal and marketing, and they may say this is the type of movie we're going to do, and they'll have influence on the actors, but really it's the director's movie. And the director is the one who's going to work on, individual scenes and characters, and specifically the flow and edit of the movie. And so in video games, I think producers are like a Hollywood producer, and a designer is like a Hollywood director. And right after college, so, there was no video game program at all when I went to college. So I got a degree in film at Southern Methodist University in Dallas, and immediately moved out to LA afterwards, and got a job immediately with Activision, which had just moved to LA from the Bay Area, maybe 3 to 6 months prior. And I started working at Activision the day of, which was in a tall building in Brentwood, on the day of the O.J. Simpson car chase.
Oh.
And I was on a small team, and did started out in QA and moved on to be like a production assistant, and then an assistant producer of games like Pitfall, The Mayan Adventure for Sega Genesis and SNES, and a whole bunch of other games there. I left and went to MGM Studios, which was starting a interactive group, and then Sony Pictures, which had a sort of a kind of a innovative Skunk Works type interactive group. So where we did some free-to-play games before that was a thing. We did some mobile games before that division became Sony Ericsson. We did kind of a YouTube thing where people could edit their own videos that they shot with a Sony camera, and then put those videos up on the web and share them. And that was all pre-YouTube until, I guess, Sony decided no one will ever share a video on the web. So they shut down our division. And then I went as a producer to work on some Medal of Honor games for a developer that did work for EA and Santa Cruz. And then I went from that developer to EA, and I was at EA for about 7 years as a producer of like The Godfather for PC. Though at that point, having done some Medal of Honor games and Godfather, I was very wary of violence in video games. So I changed divisions from EA from that part of the EA company to the Sims group, and then I did Sims games for 5 or 6 years before moving to Minneapolis, where my wife got a tenure job teaching art history at the University of Minnesota. And so from Minneapolis, I've been a designer at a mobile game studio where we have, millions and millions of downloads. So it's successful, but it's a little under the radar. Here in the Twin Cities, we do the PPA bowling and Rapala fishing, very sports oriented, an NHL game, Arctic Cat snowmobiling game, games like that. And I've been, this mobile designer. We also did a Xbox and PS4 version of the Rapala fishing game as well.
Do you play games?
I do.
What do you play? What's your go-to?
Right now I'm playing. I'm actually playing a lot of Clash Royale. I know everyone sort of plays it, and it's loved and reviled. But I love that game. So,
okay.
About to get a Switch though, so very excited for that.
Awesome. That should be fun. You said at one point when you were a kid, you had 8 computers and 7 game systems.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I had I took over our living room, and my parents built just this long table, with sort of power supplies on it. And so I had, giant switch boxes for different TVs, so that I could, at any given moment, sort of play any game on any system. And we had to build a wall on the entryway with a giant bookcase, and that bookcase was totally filled with games. So it looked just like our living room for many years looked just like this, this laboratory, this video game laboratory. We had different computer desks. So, if you have a Commodore 64, that sort of takes up one desk. And Atari 2600, Atari ST took up the whole desk, and an Apple computer took up one desk. So it was desks and tables and TVs and systems, and that was all our front living room.
Wow.
I can't believe my parents did that. Saying that. And it totally took over at least that portion of the house. At the time, writing was, there's no internet to speak of. And so, things were different. I wrote initially everything on longhand. And my mom would type stuff up on an old typewriter that we had.
Wow.
And I think with my first bigger paycheck, I spent that money buying a newer, fancier typewriter. To help. And then, if I were ever late missing, almost to miss a deadline. I remember there were days before faxing, so I had to read the column word for word to someone at my syndicate
Wow.
who copied it down, and then that's how that would happen. So that was, before FedEx, before faxing.
Mm-hmm.
As things came along, like the ability to fax things, it really helped. And uh, um, and I didn't get email until I was graduated from college and at Activision. That's all I got. So I'm like, gosh, an email would have been so useful.
Sure.
My column was in the San Jose Mercury News. And so that was really helpful because most of the industry was in the Silicon Valley area. So I was the video game columnist for that area, for their local paper. And that really, really helped in making and, getting into companies and being able to get review copies and being able to talk to people and having that sort of level of authority came from being in that newspaper. Before I was in the San Jose Mercury News, I went to I want to say this San Francisco Chronicle, and did my typical cold call, just show up, and they would not let me in. And it goes back to the whole Patty Hearst days and that snapping, that they were really tight about security, which was something that I never found to be true at any of the other papers, any other paper I can walk into, but not the San Francisco one. So it was, maybe a few months later that I managed to get in the San Jose paper.
Awesome. All right, so this podcast is listened to primarily people who like the Atari 8-bit computers, but certainly people who like video games of all sorts. So if you could send a message to the kids who grew up with you playing video games and now they're listening to this podcast, what would you tell them?
I would say if it's a kid, I would say don't let being a kid be a hurdle to doing anything. It is sometimes even a bigger advantage. People will give you more of a chance than they will when you are an adult. Things are really with email and very much easier to do now, I think, in some ways. When I was a kid, I like I said, I would call up Mercer Mayer at home. I did a history project for school, and I wound up tracking down Walter Cronkite at his house and talked to him. Like, you can call people. Mm-hmm. I was always a little amazed at EA. Like, my name would be in credits of games that millions of people would get, and I would sort of be surprised that I wouldn't get one email from any kid saying, how do I become a designer or a producer? Because I feel like, now maybe I get hundreds or thousands now, but I would never get any, and I would be willing to answer emails. But I just wouldn't get any thing like that. So I would say, go out of your way to do stuff, and don't let being a kid be a barrier.
And what if these people have grown up and now they're 40-somethings?
Yes. Well, things are tougher. No, making games is significantly easier than it was in those days. In those days, it never occurred to me in some ways that I could really make video games because I knew that it was all assembly code and super mathy. And but now with tools like Unity, especially with Unity being free, it's very easy to make games. And but it's not just being game designers. There's all kinds of stuff in the game world that is helpful and useful and cool to do.
Yes, indeed.
And don't destroy old games or game systems, or rip out an old Atari 2600's insides and make it into a MAME machine, because those systems aren't being made anymore, and they should be salvaged and kept and restored and not destroyed.
Hear, hear. Awesome. I think I have what I need. Thank you, Rawson.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so you were doing the game boards, and then you got your own computer at home?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I got my game system
Right.
we have 3 pecan trees in our backyard. And
You have what?
3 pecan trees.
Oh, yeah. Excuse me.
Pecan trees.
Well, pecan, yeah. Yeah, you're from Abilene, I forgot. I'm from Nebraska. I'd say pecan trees, you'd say pecan trees. Okay.
Right. Well, we got 3 of those trees in our backyard.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute, there are 2 ways you can help. You can help fund these interviews directly by contributing to my Patreon. A small monthly contribution will help offset the expenses of making these oral history interviews. Contribute at patreon.com/savitz. Or make a tax-deductible contribution to the Internet Archive, a nonprofit digital library that has done incredible things to preserve computer history. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate. Thanks.